Hello everyone, welcome back to the Lowland Greenhouse here. I've got another special plant spotlight for you guys. This is a species of tropical pitcher plant that is quite common and relatively easy to grow, although not often quite as well represented in cultivation as I think it should be. Probably because a lot of people think it's a very simple looking, sometimes bland plant, but I would certainly have to disagree. Our species for today is Nepenthes gracilis. This is a plant that was just repotted too. This is a moderately sized one for as far as they go. This is a species that is found in quite a wide range. There are records from as far north as Cambodia, and then they are found down through Thailand, Peninsula Malaysia, and then across Sumatra, Borneo, Sulawesi, and a number of the smaller islands in between those bigger islands as well. So quite a wide-ranging species. They're found from sea level to, in some cases, almost 1,700 meters in elevation, so nearly 3,000 feet. Or sorry, not 3,000, like almost 6,000 feet elevation, excuse me. But most forms of this species will be found below 1,000 meters elevation, usually below 500, so below 1,500 feet in elevation. So generally it is considered a true lowland plant, a species that likes it hot all the time, all year round. Now, because there are some highland or semi-highland forms, that shows this species is a little more tolerant of variable conditions than one would expect from a pure lowlander, but they definitely do best when it is hot and humid around. They're not terribly picky about their habitat necessarily either. They are one of the few species that will be found growing in literal swamps. Sometimes the karangas, the peat swamps of Southeast Asia, you will find them rooted in there right alongside species like Mirabilis and Ampullaria. But they will also grow in open savannas, along the edges of forest margins, on rock faces and such, kind of wherever they're able to get a foothold. And once they do that, they tend to be a very, very rapidly growing species. They have relatively small stems. Often the stem, it's a round stem, and it usually doesn't get much more than a couple millimeters in diameter. Giant forms, which I'll talk about in a little bit, might get a little larger, but generally it is a thin, gracile, hence the name, plant. And that extends also to the leaves. The leaves are very thin, linear to lanceolate. They come out to a very narrow tip where the tendril meets. And where they meet the tendril, they are very heavily decurrent. So the leaf base meets the tendril flat, and then the sides of the leaf actually continue down along the stem for quite a distance, almost to the next leaf below it actually. And then of course there are the pitchers. This is, in most cases, a relatively small pitchered plant. Lower pitchers, they average around 2 to maybe 3 inches tall. Some of them will get to about 4 inches tall. And they tend to be relatively also slender in most forms. They have kind of an ovular base about the lower half to third, and then above that it narrows just slightly above a little hip, and then it is either cylindrical or very narrowly funnel-shaped above that. They tend to sport a pair of narrow fringed wings on the front of the pitcher that run up to where they meet the peristome. The peristome is also very, very simple. It's just a tiny little round lip around the mouth of the pitcher, and that goes up to a very slight slope, the neck, where it meets the lid. The connection there is actually relatively wide compared to the size of the pitcher, especially when compared to a lot of other species of pitcher plants where that lid connects only at a very, very tiny point on the back of the pitcher. And then the pitcher lid itself is simple and round and just kind of hangs over the mouth of the pitcher. Now, a unique thing about that structure, though, you would think the peristome isn't doing a whole lot for insect capture or attraction. It's mostly the color of the pitchers, the nectar that's produced underneath the lid. But as these pitchers are sitting out in their habitat, And as little insects, ants and beetles and stuff crawl up there, they get underneath that lid to feed on the nectar. These guys have what you could call rain-activated or trigger mechanism, where the underside of the lid doesn't really have a whole lot to grab onto. It's very slick, it's very featureless, and so when insects are feeding on there, if it happens to rain or if a little drop of water comes down, hits that lid, it's just enough where the insect would have been able to hold on before, but that little bit of pressure will actually make the lid bounce. It'll cause the insect to lose grip and then fall into the pitcher. Now, the upper pitchers are a very similar look overall. They don't differ too much from the lower pitchers, other than they tend to be maybe a little bit larger and a little bit more slender. So they still have that kind of ovular, slightly funnel-shaped more base, but then it broadens up to kind of ovular shape, and that's usually the lower third to maybe quarter of the pitcher. Above that, it becomes narrow again, and the upper 2/3 to 3/4 of the pitcher, again, cylindrical to slightly funnel-shaped. And the upper pitchers, again, tend to be a little bit larger, so they may be around 4 to 5 inches tall in some cases. One of my larger forms gets to about 4.5 inches, but most of them are roughly about this size, 3.5 inches or so. They lack the wings, but are otherwise pretty similar overall to the lower pitchers, and that includes their color as well. The upper pitchers tend to be a little bit paler, maybe more speckled looking than the lower pitchers do, but they will share similar colors. And this species is quite variable in that respect. It can be all green, which I have 1 or 2 forms that are almost entirely green. They just have very little bit of a red blush along the wings or ridges. They can be speckled, like this clone is, sometimes very lightly speckled, other times very heavily speckled. Some forms may be a solid, nice brick red coloration. Others will turn towards more of a dark purple, heavily speckled, maybe even straight up to solid maroon pitchers. And oftentimes in those dark forms, the leaves themselves will also be this rich purplish coloration. And then a few versions will actually get to almost black pitchers. I have a couple different clones here that get to that deep maroon to almost black coloration. One of them is almost tricolor speckled within that dark coloration, so it's quite a unique looking plant. And then on very rare occasions, you also get plants that kind of break that small tendency for this species. There are giant forms that also occur. Now, I am of the belief generally that those giant forms are the result of introgression with other species like Rainwardiana, which looks quite similar to this species, or Mirabilis. So some of the genes from those plants get in and allow the plant to get a little bit bigger, but because they're so similar, it still looks basically like gracilis at a glance. And so those plants, the pitchers may average well over 5 inches and maybe even get up to 7, 8 inches tall in some cases. One that I have right now is called Giant Black. It is a huge plant compared to the rest of these guys. Pitchers are usually 2 to 3 times the size of this minimum, and they tend to be, the lower pitchers are a very deep, speckly purple, almost solid purple-black color. Upper pitchers, the base tends to be paler, and then the top has that same kind of purple coloration. So larger versions do exist. The entire plant, as it grows, those vines can range anywhere from 10 to 20 feet in length once they're up to full size, and often they will need to grow to 10, 15 plus feet before they start even flowering. Once the vine actually gets big enough too, like some of its relatives, such as Ampullaria, another swamp-loving lowland species, it will produce a carpet of basal pitchers around the base of the main stem. So off of there you get all these little very short, very compact rosettes that form, and those just form a carpet of little tiny leaves and pitchers sticking up off of that at the base of the plant. Should the main stem get damaged at any point, one or multiple of those little rosettes will actually take over, but otherwise a lot of those will just kind of stay small like that, gathering food around the base of the plant, and on larger stems you might also see aerial rosettes form as well. I have one of my dark maroon plants right now especially. It has produced a very long vine, and about every foot or so along the vine there has been a node that is activated, and it's just got this little tiny rosette with this dense cluster of pitches just kind of hanging on the otherwise bare stem. So that allows this plant to capture all sorts of manner of insects that might be in the area and maximize its chances for feeding. Now, this is a species that I would consider to be extremely easy in cultivation. Again, not common because a lot of people will look at, say, this kind of gracilis pitcher. I think the speckles look really pretty on this plant, but otherwise, one might say this is a relatively plain looking plant. My plants that are mostly green with just a little bit of red blush, similarly, they're kind of almost boring to look at compared to a lot of other tropical pitchers. But because they grow fast, they make a lot of pitchers, and they're relatively tolerant of a wide range of conditions, I think that they are a great option for people to grow. And also because they are quite widespread and common in the wild, it's not likely that they're going to be at a lot of risk for poaching pressure either. So it's easy to produce them in cultivation. It's easy to make cuttings and such and get them to root, especially because these guys, in humid conditions, they'll just throw aerial roots out as well along the stem and not just into soil. So all you need for these guys is simply a suitably wet carnivorous plant soil and bright conditions, warm conditions preferably as well for them to grow, and they'll take over in some cases. You'll get a mass of spindly vines with their little pitchers hanging all over the places. Now, like most Nepenthes, what I use for these guys is the 1:1:1 roughly long fiber sphagnum moss, perlite, and then washed cocoa chips. But you could grow these guys in pure sphagnum moss. You could grow them in pure peat moss as well, as long as you don't let that stay too stagnant and swampy for too long. They may be swamp growers in the wild, but they still tend to like a little bit of aeration in their soil, especially in cultivation, because those swamps in the wild, there's a little bit of water movement still going on. So in cultivation, keeping the soil just moist to maybe even slightly on the wet side, but not completely waterlogged, is about all you need to worry about for these guys. They will tolerate a little bit of drying out just until the soil surface starts to dry a bit, and they'll be happy with that as well. And then they will tolerate relatively shady conditions in a lot of cases. So just like part shade, part sun. Under artificial lights, they will tolerate sometimes not the brightest of lights, but certainly the more light you give them, the happier they will be. The bigger pitchers and the better basal carpets they'll produce, as well as the more likely it is that you might get them to flower as well. So the more light you give them, the happier they will be. And then temperatures, again, they prefer lowland conditions. So between 75 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit with humidity of between 50 and 80% is what they will prefer. But at the same time, some of my clones, I have had cuttings that have been growing out in my local household humidity and even out in some outdoor greenhouses when I was selling them at a local greenhouse for a little bit. So conditions there were maybe humidity down as low as 25-30%, very strong sunlight, and sometimes temperatures at night dropping below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The plants slow down when it's that cool, but they will still tolerate, and they will still generally live through that. And as soon as conditions start to warm up a little more, you'll see them take off again. And of course, if you get the plant that's starting to get really long and spindly, like this guy is, you can see that's quite the vine that he's got going there. And this is by no means the largest gracilis plant that I have in here. I have some vines that are 3-4 times this length. It's quite easy to either just trim, or if you want to propagate them, because you can cut anywhere along the stem, and any nodes that are below that cut will activate. Or if you already have a basal carpet, one of those will take over as the main stem after that. And so you can keep it a relatively short, compact plant, maybe even just a bush of shorter vines growing all at the same time. And each of those cuttings, if you want to make more, all you have to do, stick it in some wet soil and wait. It usually only takes a couple of weeks for them to start throwing out roots, or if some of those sections already had aerial roots, those will just take over as the new roots for that section, and you'll see the plant starting to grow on relatively quickly. So easy to grow, easy to propagate, comes in a lot of different color variations and some variation in shape as well. There are squat forms, there are more hourglass shaped forms, there are the really long, skinny pictured forms, like this one has a little bit skinnier pictures, others are a little fatter. So plenty of variety to choose from as well. Now that is all that I have for this species right now. Certainly if there's something I've missed or questions that you have about this, make sure to leave them in the video comments below. If you'd like to learn more about the plants and animals and such that I work with, you can also visit my website at carltoncarnivores.com. The database and blog are there with information on a lot of the stuff that I work with, and I'm always building on it. You can also always find photos and video tidbits on social media. Basically, anywhere that I am at, it will be at Carlton Carnivores. And if you'd like to help support the production of these sorts of educational videos, you can buy some of the plants or merchandise and such that is at my website shop. Or you can become a Patreon member. Members there get early access to the videos, exclusive access to the monthly seed contests that I do, offering things that you're probably not going to ever see in my shop. I will have one-offs that members there get chances at. You can also donate simply at Ko-fi or contact me for other ways. Most of the links for these things will be in the video description below. But until next time, I'm Håkon Carlton, and this is Carlton Carnivores.